Spencer, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Introduce yourself to us and let us know a little bit about your business.
Andy, thank you so much for having me. My name is Spencer Coursen. I am a threat management expert. I am the founder of Coursen Security Group. I also have my own podcast called Coursen's Corner. But more importantly, I am the author of the upcoming book, The Safety Trap, which is now available for pre-order and will be available everywhere this May 18th.
Yes, and I can say, Spencer was awesome enough to send me a copy of the book to read in advance, and it is fantastic. It's right here. It's worth it. You got a pretty big name here on the front, giving you a quote, Clint Emerson, Mr. 100, Deadly Skills himself. Man, this is awesome. How does it feel to publish a book like this?
Well, Andy, I mean, you have your own book out. I was actually going to ask you, how does it feel on come publishing date? Because it's a surprising amount of work. Going
Yes.
from the idea of a book to actually getting those words down on paper. And then you realize that, oh, that's just the first draft. And then, right. And
Yeah.
then you have to go through all the edits and the legal review and the fact checking and then draft after draft of revisions and revisions. And we were so just yesterday, the audiobook samples came out, but
Mhm.
on Friday, we were still doing pickups
Yeah.
to get all the little nuances down, and hey, there was a background noise, and I have some great outtakes of me going, being a protector is a craft I've honed my entire life. Being a protector, being a protector, being a protector. And I was like, I
Yep.
wrote these words. You'd think I'd be able to say them, with some
Yes.
authority.
Yes. I know
Um,
exactly how that
but
feels.
no, it's really going great. You have what's called an advanced reader copy, an ARC.
Mhm.
The hardcover, I just got the tracking number for the hardcovers. They're coming on Saturday. I'm really excited to see it, and I'm very excited to. I want I want a selfie of me walking through an airport with my book in the bookstore so that I can. It's been an amazing ride. So much work, but really
Yeah.
looking forward to having the finished product in hand.
Absolutely, man, and you should be proud of it. The book is, it's fantastic. It really is. We'll talk about
Thank you.
that a little bit later here. Now, a lot of my listeners here, they know the name Gavin DeBecker, and you got to work for him for a little while there. What was it like for working with Gavin?
I did. So prior to starting my own consulting firm in 2012, my professional experience was I was in the Army. I was an airborne ranger, combat veteran, served in Afghanistan, then did some diplomatic security work, helping to keep dignitaries safe. And then as I left government service, I was recruited by Gavin DeBecker, and I was his deputy director of protective services. And that was an amazing journey. I had first read Gavin's book, Gift of Fear. It's actually sitting right on my bookshelf right over there.
Yeah,
But
yep.
I first read Gavin's book sitting in a safe house in the where was I? I was in Koust, which is like right on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yeah,
And then to
okay.
flash forward years later to actually work for the man himself, it was a true honor. And it was really great because I was able to take the military experience and the government experience, but it opened up my eyes to a whole new world of what the private sector security looks like. Because in the government, they have it, or the military, they have an unlimited amount of resources. And when you are
Mhm.
working in the diplomatic security space, the government has the ability to provide protective safeguards to those at-risk individuals as needed. So as the risk goes up, that can scale out. As the risk goes down, that can scale back. But when you're on the private sector or the private side of the house, it really comes down to budget,
Yeah,
because you have the people who both need security and want security. You have the people who need it but don't want it. You have the people who want it but don't need it. And it's really just this, you're managing just a lot of it, and managing and framing a lot of expectations about what is the best way to looking at the real world risk to put those most practical applications in place to help keep you safe. So I learned a tremendous amount from not just working, or I'm sorry, not just from Gavin himself, but working in and around that firm. I mean, it was truly a remarkable experience.
you know what, man? I bet it was. And you talked about people who want to have security in their lives, but maybe they can't afford it, or people who can't afford it, do they really need it? And I really feel like for the people who want to have security in their lives but can't necessarily afford it, your book, The Safety Trap, really helps bridge that gap. And when I saw your book title for the first time, I'm like, The Safety Trap. Explain to us what that means.
Sure. So the safety trap is a phrase I coined several years ago when I was trying to explain to my clients how they are most at risk when they feel most safe. Because oftentimes that the real world hazards that are out there tend to hide behind our own false sense of security, whether that because we uh, expect something to be one way, but it's really another, or false equivalence or avoidance. And so as I was going through the planning of the book, I realized that there were about 15 or 16 of these trappings that almost everyone was falling into. And I really wanted to help identify what those were, how they were allowed to happen, and then provide some protective strategies to keep them from happening to you.
And that's fantastic. And you talk about in your book that we live right now in the safest time in human history, which is true. But you think about society, you think about medicine, you think about how far we've come. And in your book, you make a really good point. I want to read this to everybody. You said, regrettably, the unrealized trade off of living in a much safer world meant that we would inevitably become weaker. As the risks were reduced, we stopped thinking about the things that could harm us. And this sounds like a mindset for a safety trap. Am I right?
It really does. Everyday safety requires the participation of everyone. It's very easy when you live in a very safe world to expect safety to be a commodity. I pay
Hmm.
my taxes, so I should be safe. I pay my water bill, so when I turn on the faucet, water should come out. And then when we find ourselves in the throes of crisis or in the aftershocks of tragedy, we realize that safety is not a commodity. It's not like we can put it on, like we can't go out to Walmart and find it on the shelf. It can't be delivered by Amazon Prime. We
Yeah.
can't put it on layaway for a later day. But what we can do is take those baby steps to identify the real risk, to identify the real to identify the realistic risks we may face. Getting myself tongue tied here,
That's
so that
hard to
we can
say. Let me tell you, man, I don't know if I could say it any better.
to identify the realistic risks we are most likely to face so that we can put in the most effective safeguards to keep that risk from ever becoming a reality. But what we cannot do is, we can no longer afford to live in a world where we simply hope that nothing will happen and then solely rely on the safeguards and solely rely on the first responders to save us once something does. And, listen, the reality is, like you said, we live in the safest time possible. Food has never been more abundant, medical technologies, life expectancy, all of these things. But and to that note, most of us will never be engaged in a terror
Right.
act or an active
Yes.
shooter engagement or get kidnapped or find ourselves handcuffed in the trunk of a car. Um, but what that really means is that all most people need to stay safe is a healthy sense of skepticism and a moderate dose of vigilance, because those two things are very small prices to pay for the freedoms and the liberties which flow so freely from peace. But without them, we will be at risk by those things that we weren't expecting to see. And I sometimes use the analogy, um, we don't stub our toes on the things we notice. We stub our toes on the things we don't. The toy on the floor didn't just appear out of nowhere to injure you while you're going for your coffee, but
Hmm.
we didn't expect to see it, so we didn't see it. But if we
Right.
just adopt that awareness plus preparation equals safety mindset, we can really mitigate so many of life's risks.
Right. And you touched on a lot there, and it reminded me of I have tried to educate my audience and my listeners on the false consensus theory. And that is that everybody thinks and acts just like you do. So therefore, if you're a good person, everybody else is a good person. If you don't lie to people, nobody's going to lie to you. And so we kind of create our own safety trap in thinking that everybody else is a nice person like we are. And I'm sure you have a bunch of stories to the contrary that not everybody is as good as you think you are.
And not only does everyone think that they're as good as you are, but we also have like an innate sense of overconfidence that we think that, well, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm smarter than most people. I'm not the best driver on the road, but I'm a better driver than most people. I'm not the best cook, but I'm a better cook than most people. And the truth is, the laws of averages don't make that true. Like there's a bell curve, and some
You're
people are
not the
really bad,
anomaly in the
and some people are really
statistics.
bad, and you're probably somewhere, in the lesser third than many of us would like to be. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the book, where it comes down to how well calibrated we are, how well, can we actually perform that which we think we could do in those, particular scenarios. If you and I go to a batting cage, and we're going to get 10 pitches, and you say to me, hey, I think I'm going to hit about half, and you go out and you hit, 5 or 6, you're well calibrated. If I go out and say, oh, I played baseball in high school, and I've kept in shape most of my life, I'm probably going to hit most of them, and I go out and hit 2 or 3, I
Hmm.
am not well calibrated. And so if we were to extrapolate that batting cage scenario to a real world risk scenario, your expectation of your skill set would be much better calibrated to help ensure your own success. Whereas mine would be kind of a safety trap of overconfidence, where I would expect myself to be able to perform one way, but the reality is I would probably falter somewhere below the standard I had expected for myself.
Right. And I completely agree with that. And I also feel like there are some people out there who just think that they're calibrated to think that they can avoid trouble, that they'll always be able to see trouble coming and they'll always be able to avoid it. You very early on in your book, you hit avoidance head on. And I appreciated it so much because I feel like that's not something that I really talk about a lot. And I want to talk about it with you today. Some levels of avoidance are good. Like,
Absolutely.
obviously, if you see a rabid dog walking down the street, you want to avoid it. But avoidance isn't always the best tactic for you in every situation.
I completely agree. Avoidance is great if, like you were saying, you're walking down the street, and the directions tell you to turn right, and you look, and it just innately, like Gavin talks about in his book, that gift of fear sets in. You want to avoid going down that street. You do not want to negotiate against your own internal sense of defense. Another good avoidance factor would be if you are asked to make a decision about something that is very important, but you want to avoid making that decision at that particular time, so that you can go back and get the best information possible, so that you can make the most informed decision that you can at a later date.
Sure.
But what we don't want to do is avoid things of concern because they make us anxious or they give us anxiety. Because those things, the more we avoid, the more anxious we feel, and the more anxious we feel, the more anxiety we bring into our lives. And it's the reality is that if we choose to not address today's concerns, we will be forced to confront tomorrow's crisis. And
Right.
it is always easier to manage the problem when it is. I mean, think about it like cancer. Who was the famous bike rider, Tour de France guy? Lance Armstrong.
Lance
Lance
Armstrong, right?
Armstrong at very early on knew that something wasn't right with his physical health, but it wasn't until he started like coughing up blood that he was like, oh, maybe I should go get checked out.
Right.
Whereas if he had not avoided those warning signs, if he had not, avoided, just because of the anxiousness and the anxiety of not wanting to know the real answer, he probably could have still been competing today. But
Right.
when we choose to avoid those things, which we just, because of uneasiness or because we're not comfortable with being uncomfortable, the long-term risks of that practice are almost vastly outweigh the discomfort of just dealing with it in the moment.
Right. And you bring up the really good point about anxiety. When you avoid something, it brings on anxiety. And we as humans don't make good decisions when we're anxious, right? We need to have a clear mind and a clear focus.
I could not agree with you more. We have a tendency to act on, I would say, in any given day, 85% of our decisions are based in emotion rather than logic.
Hmm.
I always say to people, like, look at someone, look at like the last 3 text messages in your phone. Could you have responded to those messages better if you had just like thought about it some more?
Right.
They're like, no, probably not. And then as soon as they're like, oh my gosh, you're exactly right. Because someone said something and the first reaction was, oh, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, listen, you didn't have to do that. If you had just like taken some time and allowed it to, allowed that thought to incubate in your head a little bit. You could have weighed the pros and cons. You could have, allowed that idea to incubate in your headspace a little bit. You probably would have responded in a little bit more of a logical fashion. You would have seen, the totality of circumstance surrounding that particular framing of whoever said what. But that's just not something we do. We live in a very immediate gratification. I want this now. Boom, 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 boom. And, so much of safety is chess, not checkers. But
Mhm.
chess is a thinking person's game. Checkers is more about the quick draw reaction.
Absolutely. So, in all of your dealings, with helping people, helping organizations, being in the military, can you share with us an example when you saw that someone's avoidance really didn't work out for them in the long run?
Yeah, absolutely. The most common occurrence is with inappropriate communications.
Mm.
In fact, I think the example that I use in chapter 1 of the book, which is all about avoidance, is there's a TV star who gets sent an inappropriate communication from a fan that is um,
Yeah, this is a family show, so we'll just say it's of an
right.
adult nature.
It's of an adult nature,
Right.
and she gets so freaked out that she, slams the laptop closed, and she doesn't want to deal with it. She doesn't want to know it anymore. She doesn't want to see it. She doesn't want to hear with it.
And I don't
So she
blame her for
does
that. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
But that wasn't just a one-off occurrence. That person then emailed again and then emailed again. And instead of addressing that concern head on, she just had her assistant do something to her computer so that all of those messages would go into another, folder, so that she wouldn't have to have that anxiety or that anxiousness every time she logged on to her email. But what wound up happening was this inappropriate pursuer was communicating to her his intention to stage a confrontation with her, until, flash forward a couple of months later, she's out filming on a city street, and there's a guy behind the rope line, and, the security thinks it's, a process server that needs to give her some like legal documents. And so
Mhm.
she starts walking over, and as soon as she gets close enough to hear the man talk, she knows who it is.
Mm.
And now we're off to the races.
Mm.
Now,
Mhm.
her responding in the way she did is a perfectly normal, because all of us sometimes employ avoidance as part of our own self-defense construct. It's grounded in the very essence of the "it won't happen to me," psychological survival mechanism. But the reality is that if something happens once, it's an anomaly. If something happens twice, it may be a coincidence. But if it happens a third time, that's a pattern in practice that should be addressed. And if you don't have the skill set to address that particular concern, there's nothing wrong with asking for help to have that unfavorable circumstance managed towards its most favorable resolution. But the help can't just be out there wondering if you need it. You have to ask for it in order for that help to find you. And I that's why in that chapter, that's one of the things. Just audit yourself with honesty. Is
Mhm.
this something that should be addressed? And if that's not within your particular realm of expertise, then my dishwasher broke a couple of weeks ago. I can do a lot of things. I can't fix plumbing, but I wasn't going to sit there and just like not have a dishwasher for several weeks. So I called a
Right.
plumber. A plumber
Yeah.
came over, fixed it, and now we're good to go again. Um,
Right.
a lot of our
You
life is kind of grounded in that same framework.
Right, and we don't wanna kick the can a little further down the road because, the next time you come up to kick that can, you might not be in a good as position as you were. And I'll tell you, you talk about doing a self-audit, and, I've written a book on home security. I've talked to families about, this is what you need to think about doing if somebody breaks in the worst case scenario, you're asleep, somebody breaks in at night, that sort of thing. And there was one time a few years ago, I was laying in bed and I heard this terrible crash, and I'm like, okay, what is this? And instead of jumping up and immediately taking action, I avoided trying to figure out what it was because there was a part of me inside as a human that said, hey, maybe this will just go away. And so I had to build that into my response time. I had to build that human aspect into what was going on. Okay, I see that there's a problem here. I can't avoid it. I have to act for my safety. I have to act for the safety of my family. And that was a pretty big wake up call a few years ago to understand that, you can have all the training, but you're still going to have that immediate response of avoidance because you're like, man, I really don't want to go downstairs and see what made that
Right.
noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had a similar experience. I had similar uh, reaction delays right up until I got a dog. And then I realized, oh, if my dog responded, it was time for me to
Yeah,
respond. But if my
absolutely.
dog
Great
just kind of
point.
like went up and went, and then like laid his head back down, I
Mhm.
was fine laying my head back down myself because I know for a fact that my dog is not going to negotiate against his own
There you
internal
go.
sense
I
of
like that. Dogs are
my
great.
dogs
Everybody, if you
are
don't have a dog, go get a dog. Spencer said to do it.
a well-trained dog is the single greatest home security system money can buy.
Hmm.
You get all 5 Ds in one.
Yeah. In my book, I talk about, dogs are security sirens with legs, but they are also security sirens that poop. So it's a trade off.
Yeah, grass is always greener, water bill's always higher, right?
Right, exactly. So, we're talking about making personal assessments. Also in your book, you give readers, a personal threat assessment checklist.
Yes.
What is a threat assessment and why do we need that as the average person?
So a threat assessment is sometimes threat assessments and risk assessments get conflated.
Hmm.
A risk assessment cannot be conducted until the threat assessment is done.
Hmm.
So a threat assessment is the baseline: who, what, where, when, why, how. And basically what a threat assessment is the recipe when you're baking cookies.
Mhm.
Here are all the ingredients you're going to need, and then here's how you're going to put those ingredients into place. And then after you bake those cookies and cook them, now we can do a risk assessment to see how good of a cook you are. So one of the things that I always tell people to do is, whether you're doing anything, whether you're packing to go on a trip, whether you're deciding if you should break up with your boyfriend or significant, or your girlfriend or your significant other, is write a list down, weigh out the pros and cons, or just have a checklist. Like, one of the things that they always told us in the Army was, we had pre-combat inspections. Does your weapon work? Do you have your plate carriers? Do you have all of your gear? Because regardless of circumstance or scenario, you don't want to be out in the field and realize, oh man, I forgot to charge the batteries in my flashlight. Anyone who does anything well has a checklist, and whether
Mhm.
that be the fry guy at McDonald's or the captain of your plane, they all have a list that they go down, because proper planning prevents piss poor performance. And so if we're going to use just that framework of understanding, the last thing you want to do is wonder if you got something right. If you
Mm.
have a checklist, you will know that you got it right, because you have left nothing to chance.
Absolutely. So, as a family, how do we sort of run this checklist? How do we get, a group like a mom, a dad, and two kids? How do we all do this together?
So the way that the personal threat assessments are laid out in the book, and I have one for home, one for school, one for
Mhm.
work, one for life, is there's literally 25 questions. You can just go straight down that list and do it as an individual checklist. The other thing I recommend doing is what I call the FOIL method. And this is something that you can do as a family, because this is something that the more eyes, the more vantage points, the more, areas of, everyone has their own unique experience. And because of that experience, everyone's outlook is different. When you're looking at solving a crime, detectives like to bring in someone who has what they call soft eyes, because
Mm.
maybe they're not as jaded, or maybe they're not looking at things
Right.
with like confirmation bias. But the
Yeah.
FOIL method, and everyone remembers FOIL from math class: first, outers, inners, last. And so just take first, outers, inners, last. Look, what are the first impressions? Does this house give the impression that it would be easy to break into, or is it a well manicured lawn with path lights, and you can see the security cameras and the ADT sign and the beware of dog? So what are your first impressions? And then outers. What do you see on the outside? Are there does it look like males piling up, or does the lawn look unkempt, or what are those impressions? Now, the insides. What can you see the security alarm panel from inside the window? Are there lights turned on? Does it what does the inside, say to you about how things may appear or could go, or what you could do if you were inside to get yourself outside? Is it hard to get from outside in? Is it easy to get from inside out? And then last, what are the lasting impressions? A friend of mine is a great comic, but he always says to me, if I see something and then I think about it later, and then I think about it yet again, I have to write a joke about it because that's my subconscious telling me that there's something there. And so the lasting impressions are like, hey, my mind keeps going back to this thing that I saw. So what are those lasting impressions about your house that you can kind of do? And this is something that you can do together as a family. This is something that, hey, on Wednesday, it's the daughter's day, and on Friday, it's the son's day, and on Monday, it's mom's day, and Wednesday, it's dad's day. And then that weekend, you can take everyone's takeaways and see what aligns. And I didn't even think of that. That's a really, because, and I think I use this anecdote in the book. If I go, to a supermarket and pull out, some random person and say, hey, how secure is your home? You'd be like, yeah, of course, absolutely. But if I go to that same person and say, okay, I'm a host of a TV show. We know where you live. We got your wife's permission. Everyone is out of your house, and we have left it just how you left it, telling us that it was, secure. There's $1 million in a duffel bag on your bed. You have 10 minutes. Can you get inside your house, get that money, and get out without leaving any marks that you were there or any signs that you were there? Now they're going, well, I know that my when my wife hates when I stink up the guest bathroom, so she kind of cracks that window a lot. I know that the sliding door on the patio, if it's locked, but if you just kind of slide a credit card in, you can get in and out. And now they're thinking about all those ways that they can break into a house. Guess what? That's how a bad guy's breaking into your house.
Absolutely.
So just take awareness plus preparation equals safety. Identify the most realistic risks that you are most likely to face, so that you can put in the most practical safeguards to keep that risk from becoming a reality.
Very good. You should be proud of your book. The Safety Trap is fantastic.
Thank you so much, Andy.
What was your favorite part of the book?
Finishing it.
Yeah, I hear you.
No, I mean, listen, this was one of the things. First off, you learn so much writing a book because you want to explain things in as clear and concise a way as you could. And my favorite thing about the book was really just going back and remembering some of the stories and some of those takeaways. Oh yeah, that's why I do that this way. Oh, I did remember learning this from that. And, we were talking earlier about, not everyone is going to know the luxury of having their own protective detail, but every single one of us deserves to be protected.
Yes.
And what I really wanted this book to be, and what I'm probably most proud about the accomplishment of having this dream reach fruition, was having, it's kind of a come for the story but stay for the lesson kind of a narrative. So you can read chapter 1 and be like, oh, that's an interesting story, but okay, but now it's also a resource guide. And it's something that, because when I had all of my protective notes and all of my detail notes and field notes and what have you, I was constantly going back to them to, lessons learned, or how can I explain this away? And now it's all in one resource guide that I can go back to, you can go back to, my mom can read, my sister, my brother, my cousin, my best friend. I've had people who have had the opportunity to do an advanced read. It's interesting. Parents love the chapter about overprotecting children.
Yes, it's very good.
Women love the chapter about being too polite, and men love the chapter about overconfidence. And it's funny. My personal favorite part is the case study, the bad breakup thing, where you go through that. That was the most fun to write, because that was actually a compilation of a few different stalking cases that all came into one. So that was just a fun way for me to not make it in a way that you would know who I was talking about as you were reading it, kind of, but it's interesting because, when you always hear like musicians say, oh, this song almost didn't make it onto the album, and then that's the song that is like the stadium chant, or you hear an actor talking about how they almost didn't take a particular, part in a in a movie, but then that one's becomes the part that like got them the Academy Award.
Hmm.
It's never my favorite part was the bad breakup section, and the overconfidence, the being too polite, the overprotecting children. For guys like this, you just assume that that's like common knowledge, but
Hmm.
that's what people gravitate to, and I guess that's because they gravitate to it because it is so common, because
Right.
they never really thought to look at it from this different vantage point, or they never considered this particular takeaway.
Right.
And I just didn't want anyone to be reading and go like, I tried very hard to not be like, hey, you idiot, why did you do this?
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
but say like, listen, if you're looking from the left or you're looking from the right, like this, you want to have the best information possible to make the most informed decisions so that you can help you and your family to succeed in staying safe.
Right. And your chapter on false authority like blew up. And I was like, after I was like, that was one chapter that you covered all of that. And just so honestly, I intentionally didn't put anything about it in this interview because I want people to read it. That chapter is worth the price of the entire book, in my opinion.
Thank
So
you. I
go
appreciate
go
that.
and read it and go and read it for that. Spencer, I know people are going to want to know more about you and your book. Tell us where we can find you online.
Thesafetytrap.com, www.thesafetytrap.com. It's the official book website. It also links to my consulting firm, which is CoursenSecurityGroup.com. If you Google me, I am Spencer Coursen, the actor, because
Yes.
it's one of those things where actually I have the movie poster right here. I don't know if you can
I
see
see
it,
it. Yeah, I see it.
but it was one of those things where I was a security consultant and military advisor on that film. And they had a canine dog on the raid of that
Hmm.
when the SEAL Team
Hmm.
6 went to get Bin Laden, and the film crew had an actor that was training with a dog in a Hollywood studio, and as we were filming in Jordan, the dog didn't have the proper shots, so they got turned around from
Ooh.
Jordanian customs.
Uh-huh.
So the production crew is like trying to figure out what to do. So Catherine Bigelow, the director, comes up to me in the chow line one day. She's like, "Hey Spencer, you were in the Army, right?" I was like, "Yes, ma'am." She's like, "How are you with dogs?" I'm like, "Love them." She's like, "You're my canine SEAL." So if you watch that movie, don't blink. But if
Uh-huh.
you see a guy getting drugged at the end of a leash onto a helicopter by a dog, that's
Hmm.
me.
Very
But because
cool.
I was in that movie, I have an IMDb page. And because
Yes.
an IMDb page is like what Google loves the most. So I
Right.
always say, like, you can serve your country in combat, you can save 100 lives, but you star in one movie, you'll forever
Yeah.
be inactive.
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand why you weren't, the lead billing in Zero Dark 30 there, man. Cause
Well, what's
but
funny is that there's actually a Ranger tab on my Navy SEAL uniform that no one in the production crew picked out.
ooh,
So when all of my buddies were like, "Hey man, why are you playing the SEAL?" I'm like, "Hey, listen, I got the Ranger tab on my shoulder. We're
there,
good to go."
very good. Very good. Well, Spencer, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the book. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for all that you have done. And man, I am excited about your future.
Andy, thank you so much. This was really great. I really appreciate you having me on.